So today we're going to talk about startups, especially in Singapore, and how it relates, I think, to Smart Nation. Because I mean, we've been hearing in the media about what Smart Nation is all about, and there's a lot of buzz about it. So Steve, being the Deputy Executive Chairman of IDA, could you perhaps just give a summary of Smart Nation and some background on that?
Sure. So first things first. What I wanted to try and do is just make sure that we're supporting the event because tech in Asia and startups and innovation in Singapore is critical to us. In terms of Smart Nation, the whole idea is pretty straightforward. We're facing some big challenges as Singapore, same thing that the rest of the world is facing. Aging population, urban density, the implications on healthcare, transportation, how do we look at all these issues such as resource management. So Smart Nation was originally thought of as bringing together universities, bringing together research institutes, bringing together, importantly, the startup community, the investment community, and of course, government to try and help where appropriate. And if we can pull all those parts of the businesses together, pull all those parts of the ecosystem together, then we can do something very important. And Smart Nation is not smart city with a twist. It's smart city because there's lights and trash collection. That's a smart city. Smart Nation is where we're working on big, tough, important, globally important challenges, and that's why we think it's so critical for the startup ecosystem to work on some of these big, tough, important challenges. That's the basis behind Smart Nation.
So you touched on some global problems that advanced countries or cities are facing. Could you talk about some of them? I think healthcare is one big issue that we want to tackle, right?
So simply, if everybody in the room is thinking about it, we know there's not enough hospital beds. That's not breaking news. We know that the slope of bed need is greater than the slope of bed supply. That's also not breaking news. So now the question becomes, how do we think about healthcare in the future? We need to care for people outside of a hospital more effectively going forward. And so hospitals become acute care, emergency care, and we have chronic conditions that need to be thought of in a different way. So don't go to a GP, don't go to a hospital if there's something which can be managed remotely through a different type of relationship with a GP. So the scenario is really, how do we think of technology enabling a new way of providing healthcare to citizens and to communities around the world? That's one example of why innovation is so critical. Government plays a role in terms of legislation and policy to help be possible, but the real difference is going to come from the startup community that comes up with the very cool ideas and the very cool tech.
So what other areas besides healthcare?
Too many to list. For example, transportation. Everybody's talking about AVs. So we know that instead of widening a motorway, it's better to try and pack more cars into the same width and just have them be closer together. So this is not a policy or an official statement, it's just an obvious thing about tech, which is if we can have more densely used motorways because you have a system approach versus the human failures of driving too closely or too far apart, now a system can have more cars in a given amount of space than a normal human driver. In the future, we could not continue to dedicate a lot more road surface area because we're land constrained. And so are a lot of other markets around the world. So having AVs come into the picture has to be part of the solution. AV cars, AV buses, lots of things. So transport is vital. Resource efficiency, we're not going to build a lot more power plants. How do we try and squeeze more out of the effective use that we have today? Solar, wind, lots of alternative choices. So these are things that entrepreneurs are working on around the world. So are research institutes, so are universities. There's lots of investment money looking to go to work in these areas. We'd like to be a place where that can occur.
Yeah. So Smart Nation is this huge initiative by multiple government agencies, of course headed by the Smart Nation Program Office. So as a startup, and most of us here are startups or investors, how can they get involved in this gigantic initiative?
So the simple answer on this one is please make sure that what you're thinking about is already something which is a big idea. So at the risk of being controversial or confrontational, a lot of the ideas that we see, so the other part of our portfolio is IIPL, the investment arm of IDA. So we see a lot of startups there. We see a lot of things coming through our partners and friends in the VC community. And a lot of the ideas would be what we'd refer to as, one to N, one to many. Scaling something that's been done somewhere else or replicating or cloning something that's been done somewhere else. So a startup that has something that's different, something compelling, something that's great for not only our needs, but many markets around the world, you can obviously reach out to any of the teams that you may think of, IDA, IIPL, but not from the government perspective, more because we're connected into the VCs. So Jungle or GGV or Sequoia, any of these different guys, Monks Hill, lots of different great organizations in Singapore. But the starting point is we need to know that there's something very exciting. We see way too many people that come in and say, here's a great answer for Singapore. And that's where the discussion stops, because they don't go on to articulate why it's a market that a lot of people are going to be caring about.
So I guess having a great ambition and not just targeting the Singapore market is a critical factor. And I guess another thing is talent, right? So do we have enough entrepreneurs who have that global vision and kind of the knowledge and the ability to execute to bring their ideas out into the world? Or
There's never enough. I don't think any market around the world would say there's enough. I mean, even places that are famous for innovation are always hungry for more. That's why you see some of the statistics, public statistics, saying 2/3 of bachelor degree holders working in some of the startups in San Francisco are foreign born outside the US. So there's lots and lots of global talent moving around. We'd love to have more talent in Singapore, both domestic and international, because that's the DNA mix that helps make for really exciting companies to be born. So we have some great entrepreneurs in Singapore. We're always hungry for more.
But how would you bring them in? Because I mean, there's Silicon Valley, there's great ecosystems around the world, and I think a lot of great engineers are kind of thinking, why don't I go to Silicon Valley instead? So how do you bring them back to Singapore?
Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. I mean, from the perspective, I used to live in San Francisco. It's hard when I go back to not be also excited and attractive to the energy in San Francisco. But it's something that's been built up over time. And so if you look back, way back when, DARPA, some of the early purchases out of the semiconductor industry were all the Department of Defense. So frankly, the government played a huge role in getting what's known today as Silicon Valley off the ground. Stanford realized in the 50s and 60s there were not enough technical engineers going into the community to work with these burgeoning small companies. So Stanford made a concerted push to pump more engineers into the ecosystem that then paired up with some of these aspiring entrepreneurs. And then you have a virtuous cycle because money comes behind that, and so you get more people recycling. We have all the raw ingredients. We have 2 great universities. We have lots of research money. We have lots of investment capital, et cetera. But what we don't have enough of is the never give up, make sure that it's a global domination, win the market, displace somebody else with a disruptive product. Anything you want to pick, that's the area that we're most hungry for. We have lots of great entrepreneurs that would like to have some boundary, some safety, which is, let's see how it goes in Singapore, and then we'll go into another market in the next year or 2. That's a pretty tough way to scale, and you would find less of that type of mindset in some other markets. So we're partly saying that it's not just a matter of the ingredients, it's the let's go fight hard and find that victory. That's where the engineers gravitate. That's where the money goes. There's nothing mythical or magical. It's just you gain a reputation, people want to be a part of it, and so that's where you go. That's why Facebook moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, because they had an opportunity to plug into that network that they felt was important for them. We also can be that network. We're not trying to change or disrupt or take over anybody's spot. We'd love to be a node on the network, the global network, and Silicon Valley, and London, and Tel Aviv, and so on and so on. So our goal is to be a part of that network, not to try and replace anything. And if we can do that and articulate why we think we're a great place, we're confident that we can represent one of the tours for a couple of years on an entrepreneur's journey.
Okay. So bringing great entrepreneurs is, of course, a challenge, and that's what we're trying to do, right? The other part is working with government, because, I mean, Singapore, of course, is known for its governance, but you can't say the same for other countries. So the issue here is, if I'm a startup, would I be afraid of working with government because of different culture and bureaucracy? And I think in Singapore especially, some agencies, they make their own apps. So where does the line, the private-public line stop, or where do you draw the line?
I don't think it stops. I mean, it's a fair question, but let me articulate it from a personal perspective. I've spent my entire career in tech industry, either private tech companies or public tech companies. And I've spent the last 2 years working with SingGov, with Singapore government. So from my perspective, I was, I am, and I will be a tech industry guy, not a gov guy. What I can say is that the government in Singapore is the most hungry for innovation, the most open to innovation of any organization or government that I've worked with, and I've worked with a bunch over the years in different ways. So what I would say is the hunger is there, the appetite to do something different and disruptive is there. The difference is sort of the API. We don't necessarily connect well as a big organization and a startup trying to find a way to relate to each other. You'll appreciate that as Gov, there's thousands of small companies that say, I've got something that you need to listen to, and it's just difficult to manage the volume. IDA is trying to help a little bit by bringing companies forward that we think could make a difference. But more than anything else, government is here to be a customer, not the customer, not the funder. It's meant to be one of your choices. So our view is great VCs put money behind great companies, and government would love to be a part of that as appropriate. Right. We have a lot of people that show up at our office and say, if I fill in the forms, can I get a grant? And then if I do something, will you buy my product? I mean, to us, that's not an entrepreneur's journey.
Right. So the government as a customer, you would kind of evaluate the solutions that startups come up with. And
we have a program inside IDA that's specifically targeted. We set it up 1.5 years ago called accreditation. We go through a due diligence process. Is the code buggy? Has somebody put foreground IP on background IP they don't own? So we've tried to understand the validity of a startup, because it would be a bad deal if we put something in and citizens had a real problem in terms of a breakdown in service because we tried to be supportive of a startup.
Okay.
So we try and look at it intelligently. But yes, if there's something that's new and exciting and different, I can assure everyone that government would love to learn more about it and to be a user of it if we can understand that we can deliver new things to citizens.
Okay. So the thing with the accreditation program is that, I mean, there have been some criticisms of how exhaustive it is, and it's not exactly targeted at startups, right? But more mature companies.
I wouldn't use the word mature. So, if you think of a startup, I mean, since startup is a widely defined term, so if you think of a startup as 3 people with a magic marker and a whiteboard idea and no MVP and no experience, then yeah, that's not the right program for them. Okay. But we have other people that would be thrilled to work with them potentially. In terms of our accreditation program, I won't use the word mature, because we look for companies that are young enough, that have not sort of plateaued and stopped figuring out how to grow, so they come to us as some sort of last resort. So we don't want to be that crowd. We'd like to see companies that maybe have a small handful of customers. We can work with them to see if there's something exciting to support their growth. So yes, there has to be a functional product, otherwise there's nothing for Gov to buy. Right? Government's not going to buy an idea as much as it's going to buy a tech. So we do try and look at something, but I won't go back and say it's a mature company, because that means they've been around for a while. And for us, a startup is a big company that hasn't yet become a big company. And an SME tends to be generally a smaller company that has been in a zone for a little while and sort of in a growth path that's a little bit difficult to break out. Yeah. So we do try and speak very directly and honestly. To us, a startup and an SME are not in the same universe.
Okay. So in the news some weeks ago, there's this talk about a smart nation platform. So maybe there's a bit of confusion, I think, between smart nation and smart nation platform. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Easy. Smart Nation platform is as advertised, which is we believe that a smart nation has to start with connectivity, pervasive, great connectivity, that other things can be enabled by or built on. So as an example, back to the point I was offering a few minutes ago, healthcare paradigm. If you want to discharge a patient from hospital as a caregiver, you need to know that he or she is still under your care. So let's say that they have a sensor that may be something which is either on them or, as we look to the future, an embedded sensor. And then what you would be able to say is, I know that I'm keeping track of that individual, whether they're on an MRT or in a basement 3 car park or a lift shaft. I need to make sure that I have them under my care. That means that connectivity has to be pervasive. So a Smart Nation platform is all the 1 gig fiber that we have to 95% of the island, plus Wi-Fi and cellular connectivity everywhere. And the idea is that by having everybody and everything connected everywhere all the time, we have an IoT opportunity, we have future models. That's where disruptive healthcare, disruptive transport can come into play. So the platform is the super connectivity, and then we have some analytics capabilities with sensors to try and gather data that allows us to understand what's happening in the environment.
So given, I mean, the Prime Minister codes, right? So we all saw his Sudoku solver, right, which is pretty impressive. So yet at the same time, I mean, government being government, there's the layers of bureaucracy, like for policy to pass, you have to go back and forth, right, within an agency. So as much as the leaders are forward-thinking, and they are, how do you ensure that, for example, within IDA, how can they keep up with what startups are doing, what's happening in the private industry?
Well, a couple of things is we just have to be out in the market. The reason that we like being a part of events like today, and events last week with NUS, and the event the week before with IDA hosting some of its own events, is because we want to be a part of the community. So we don't sit in the office and say, please bring your great ideas to us and we'll review them in our 3 o'clock meeting. We try and be out, shake hands, get to know people. So just to repeat, we want to be with industry, we want to be in the flow and understand and listen and learn. And we always respond to people that say, can we explain something to you? So the answer is we want to be connected. At the same time, we go out and promote Singapore everywhere. We're going to be in Berlin in 2 weeks talking about why Singapore. We were just in Australia a few weeks ago talking about why Singapore with the head of the Australian Communications and Information Ministry. So there's a lot of awareness for Singapore, and we want to be in and help both enhance that and also learn from that. So just taking a walk around and spending time. There's a lot of people here that I've had a chance to get to know in different events. So that's part of how we want to be plugged in. Just like any of you, it's a networking opportunity to learn.
So what have you learned from startups you've spoken to?
To be honest with you, the number one thing is I am a big fan, I know you are, Terence, but I'm a big fan of things that are vertical leaps or 10x, orders of magnitude, whatever you want to call them. The greatest thing about startups, and I've worked in both big companies and small companies, the greatest thing about startups is the passion and the belief that something that is so amazing that has not yet come to the world's attention is being worked on, and that enthusiasm and excitement that we could be onto something incredible. What I don't respond to, just in terms of the personal style, is people that say, there's something in the market, I can be 20% faster or 10% cheaper. That's not something that's going to change the world. And my experience over the years with customers is inertia is a really big deal. So for everybody that thinks about this from a physics perspective or any other perspective, inertia is pretty tough to change. Once something's in motion, it stays in motion. Customers do not generally change for a 10% improvement in anything. And so for all the startups that are out there trying to persuade guys like me and my teammates that there's going to be a little improvement here or a faster version of something else, boy, that's really tough for us to get excited about. And it's hard for us to understand how it's exciting for the startup to work on. And then when people say there's not enough funding, we just heard from one of your previous speakers, Series A. So if there's not enough funding, our natural inclination is you haven't met the right guys, because certainly from our network, we know that there's $1.5 billion of money looking for a place to go to work. They're just trying to find something to be excited about. So startups that want to change the world, we love hanging out with.
Great. So Singapore has been, I would say, a huge exporter of city building expertise, and with the industrial parks that's been building, and I think in the Guardian, there's a Guardian article about how Singapore wants to build a city 10 times its size in India. So how does Smart Nation kind of play into this this push that Singapore has towards being an expert in city building?
I mean, Singapore has done amazing things. I've lived here a total of 15 years, so I've seen some of the things along the way. Singapore's done amazing things. If you think of port and the expertise around logistics, you think about water purification with high flux and others. So the scenario is pretty simple. Healthcare, resource, transport, these are all issues that every country in the world is thinking about. It does not matter if it's a certain market like North America or a certain market like Eastern Europe. everybody is thinking. They may be approaching it from a slightly different entry, but everybody's worried about it. Aging population, Japan, other countries are deeply, deeply concerned about these implications. So any company in Singapore that is working on these issues will, by definition, have a global market if it's thinking about the problem in a big enough way. So that's our #1 challenge, is just having the fortitude and commitment to go after something big and tough. And then if we can do it in Singapore, we can do it in a lot of different markets around the world. We've proven that with the expertise we've already developed. The key is, don't solve a little problem. Little problems attract small investment and attract small outcomes. I mean, it's pretty obvious. So we want to just turn that on its head. Big issues, big investments, big outcomes. And we think we represent a great, to use the expression, test track, test case. A lot of the teams that I work with don't like to use test bed because they feel it sounds too passive. So things that have to do with active and pushing and searching. So that's what we're looking for.
So I guess if I'm a startup, I have a solution that I think will be groundbreaking. How do I even start? Like, do I approach you? Do I exchange name cards with you? Or, how does it work?
My philosophy in these things is entrepreneurs that have an unshakable commitment and an unshakable belief that they're working on something exciting can always find a way. So to make it easy, I'm always available. Somebody can send a note to me on email or send a note to me at Twitter or whatever you want to do and say, we need to talk about something. And generally, if it's not me, it'll be somebody that's close to me. So just in the spirit of honesty, I get 100 people a week that say I've got something, and the reality is not many do. I mean, the harsh reality is, hey, if you think this is cool and you think this other solution, boy, if you like Chope, you should look at my restaurant table booking app. So that isn't something that we tend to respond to a lot. But if you're not finding somebody to listen to and you're completely convinced that you've got something amazing, we'll find a way to get together. I'm around, lots of my teammates are around.
Yeah. So on that note, please thank Steve for this session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.